not nervous for any of my other speeches, but
This one.
for this one.
Oh, head to the right of that. There you go.
Bam, look at you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yep.
I liked your speech. That was very compassionate and wise. All right. Hi, everyone. It's me again. Are we ready?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Start now. Today I'm going to talk to you about something very awkward for me, but it always feels like an elephant in the room pretty much everywhere I go. I've only talked about it with like people one-on-one, so this is a new setting, so welcome my guinea pigs. Today I'm going to talk about why I think our national dialogue on transgender people should change. And I'm going to start it out by asking you all a question. You can just show of hands, and if somebody really wants to like take a stab at this, please do. Has anybody ever thought about if there's a difference between the words sex and gender? I see two hands. Would either of you like to take a stab at this? What do you think it is?
Like the difference between them?
Yeah.
I think, you can go about this anywhere, but anyone can view it differently, because if someone sees and says, okay, my gender, I see myself as a female, and my sex, I was born as a female. So everyone's gonna see your own gender differently, personally. Like you're gonna see your own gender differently than how you were born as a sex. If that makes sense. I would describe it the same way. Like your sex is what you're born into, your gender is how you persuade it, like how you see yourself.
Thank you. I'm going to take the floor back quick just because I got a time limit here, kiddo. Thank you. So the way I was researching it, sex has to do with open up your legs. What are you? It's about identifying somebody based on their sexual characteristics. Gender has to do with somebody's persona, their how they present themselves, how they personally identify, and it's also based on social norms of the time. And gender dysphoria is something that people generally, not all transgender people experience it. I certainly do. And it's when your biological sex and your gender don't align. And it's the discombobulating feeling you feel pretty much all the time based on that. So I felt like I should do this topic because it's a form of self-defense. Because according to PBS News, last year there was a record number of anti-transgender legislation that was proposed or passed, and in the Trump administration there were more than 70 executive actions taken that directly adversely affected transgender people. These include what you've probably heard of bathroom bills. So we're fortunate here in Iowa, but in many states, I would be required to go into the men's room where I would not feel safe, so I would probably duck down behind a tree or something, I don't know. But I'm just saying, like, it'd be very uncomfortable for me to be put in that situation. And there are athletics bills that either ban transgender people from participating in sports or participating with people of their gender, and strict legal protections. This has to do with housing discrimination, businesses and employment, homeless shelters, government programs and schools. Government agencies were instructed to address people only by their birth sex during the previous administration, so that's a lot of the stuff still ongoing. And some of these things were really important to me, like homeless shelters. I was homeless for 17 years, and I rarely stayed at shelters because I know some of them, they would straight up ask you like, we need to know what you have there between your legs. It was very awkward. I just chose to sleep outside. I got ticketed in Santa Rosa, California for $250 for camping within city limits. So I either take my chances in the shelter, staying with the guys, not feeling comfortable, safe, or respected, or I'd go sleep on the street, which is what I chose to do. There were several other things. Prison inmates were moved with people of their birth sex. Trans people banned from serving in the military. Who would want to? I'm a conscientious objector anyway. But stacking the courts, Trump appointed several federal judges into key positions throughout the country into federal courts. So when the executive branch isn't treating you well, or like maybe they're misgendering you, then and then you take it to court, you've got that stacked against you as well. So that's why I chose this topic as a form of self-defense. And I think transgender people have it hard enough without the most powerful people in the world using their position to persuade people that we are men trying to get into the women's restroom because we're after women and children. And I think that dialogue is gross, offensive, and these decisions that they're making about it based on the Tucker Carlsons of the world personally affect me and affect the way people view me and others. The suicide rate of transgender people is 10 times that of the national average, and 2021 there were more transgender people murdered than any other year before it. Over 375 of them were murdered. Here are some of the faces from 2021 that were killed. It was the deadliest year on record. When I attended the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, I learned that there were more trans people killed in hate crimes than any other demographic combined. That's not overall total, but that's percent based on how many there are. And I'm going to wind this down with some math. I think this one's really important. According to the Philadelphia Center for Transgender Surgery, on average it costs about $130,000 for somebody to transition. There's approximately 1.4 million transgender patients in the U.S. These are transgender people who are seeking medical coverage for it, because some aren't. So that means $130,000 per trans person times 1.4 million. It would cost right now $182 billion to pay for all medical coverage for all transgender people. Let's put this into perspective. AP Press calculated that North Carolina's bathroom bill would cost them $3.75 billion for the state. That's one bill. Remember, there were over 100 bills that were passed. So let's take 100 bills times 3.75. We'll round that down to 3 million. We'll assume that was an expensive bill. We'll call it 3 billion. $3 billion per bill times 100 bill equals $300 billion is the total cost of all these bills. Now let's take 300 billion, I suck at math, I'm so long. $130,000 times 1.4 million transgender people. It would cost $182 billion for all transgender people to get surgery. 3 billion, the cost of all the bills, divided by $182 billion, the cost for all transgender people to transition. If instead of spending all of that money on campaigning against transgender people, they spent half that amount, they could afford to help all transgender people transition. They'd save twice as much money. And I'm gonna wrap it up by saying I think facial feminization surgery is amazing and should also be covered besides just bottom surgery. Make people feel more comfortable. And lastly, my call to action is don't vote for politicians that have anti-trans stances. Do some research. If you hear people saying shitty stuff about trans people, if you make it a point to say something rather than say nothing, I'd appreciate it for the rest of my life. And I'll wrap it up with a quote by Mahatma Gandhi: "A nation's greatness is measured by how it treats its weakest members." Thank you.